Hello, I'm Jules, sort of. This is a slightly more advanced video and combines some terms from a few previous videos. If you want to understand these terms better, check out the glossary playlist, which I've linked below in the description box. I have been using Ken Wilber's 5 states/stages of spiritual development, but I've been finding them insufficient for the parts of spiritual development that I most want to talk about. So I'm proposing 7 states/stages of spiritual development to provide what I think is some very helpful granularity. The 5 states/stages in Ken Wilber's integral theory are gross, subtle, causal, witnessing, nondual. I'm proposing splitting subtle and causal into 2 stages each, such that we get something like this. Gross. This is ordinary physical world awareness and identifying with the physical body. Subtle 1, this would be awareness of the mental/emotional world and a corresponding identity, so identifying with one's mind instead of with one's body. Subtle 2, this would include outer court magical world experiential awareness and identifying with some kind of self that is not restricted to being confined within its physical human body, but which has the same personality/characteristics of this lifetime. This self is sometimes called the astral body. This is the minimum state required to communicate with non-corporeal beings, including things like spirit guides. Causal 1. This would include inner court magical world experiential awareness and identifying with a type of higher self that is more than the personality and characteristics of this current lifetime. For example, a self that exists across multiple lifetimes, but doesn't yet have direct access to knowing/gnosis. Causal 2. This would include experiential awareness of the base principles of reality. Yes, in this state/stage, you can experience base principles directly, essentially what Plato called ideal forms. One of these that tends to get a lot of attention is the direct experience of unconditional love. The identity here is often with a higher self or knower that has direct access to inner knowing or gnosis. In this state, inner guidance no longer feels like it's coming from something other than the self that you identify as. You now have direct access to the knowing. But this isn't yet the everything nothing of the non-dual state/stage. Witnessing. This includes experiential awareness of the fundamental opposites, for example, yin and yang, something and nothing, in other words, the void, masculine and feminine, or self and not self. Identity here tends to be with awareness itself. And non-dual, which is simply non-dual awareness and identity. The fundamental opposites collapse into the same thing in this state/stage. Now the naming. I believe I have heard people use terms like low and high to refer to this level of granularity. For example, low subtle and high subtle. I don't really like this very much at the moment because I think it lends itself too easily to better than, less than thinking. I think simply using the numbers, for example, subtle 1 and subtle 2, is better, but could still run into the same problem. Early subtle and late subtle is better because it just describes the order in which we encounter the stages. Another possibility is to name the states/stages based on the experiences that they actually refer to. So, for example, physical, mental, emotional, outer court magical, inner court magical, archetypal. I suppose we could keep the term causal for this state/stage. It certainly fits, but that might get confusing when in this 7-state/stage system, it only refers to the second half of the causal stage in the 5-state/stage system. Witnessing, non-dual. I see two main advantages to this naming style. One is that there isn't anything inherent to the names themselves that might encourage people to think that one state/stage is better than another. A second advantage is that it's much clearer which phenomena each term is referring to. The primary disadvantage that I see is that these are new terms, so they require explaining until they catch on, if they ever do catch on. The advantage of something like early subtle is that it's relatively self-explanatory to anyone already familiar with integral theory, which is pretty popular among the niche crowd of people interested in consciousness progression of various kinds. I suspect I'm most likely to use the early/late naming system, simply so I don't have to explain myself quite so much. So this would be gross, physical stuff, early subtle, mental emotional stuff, late subtle, outer court magic, early causal, inner court magic, late causal, base principles of reality, witnessing, fundamental opposites, and non-dual, the whole shebang. What do you think? Do you have an opinion on this matter? Or do you know of an existing set of names that I could use to represent this level of granularity? So, how it relates to stages of consciousness progression using a model like spiral dynamics. I got the basic idea of modeling the relationship between consciousness progression and spiritual progression this way from Ken Wilber, but I disagree with some of his specific conclusions. So here's what I see based on my own experiences and what I've seen in other people. Consciousness progression and spiritual development are mostly independent paths, but they do influence each other. And there are some dependencies that each path seems to have on the other. I intend to make another video that will go into this in more detail, but for now, all of Tier 1 is about mastering gross stage. I actually think that each Tier 2 stage is at least as big in terms of developmental progress as all of Tier 1, which is why I drew the Tier 2 stages as so big in my RPG map video. Tier 2. Yellow. Early subtle stage is required to continue to turquoise. So, if a person is still in gross stage when they get to yellow, their yellow stage work is going to include discovering early subtle stage, mind and emotions. Turquoise. Late subtle stage is required to continue to coral. So, if a person is still in early subtle, mind and emotions, when they get into turquoise, their turquoise work is going to include discovering late subtle stage, outer court magic. Coral, early causal stage, is required to continue to teal. So if a person is still in late subtle, when they get to coral, their coral work will include discovering early causal, inner court magic. Teal, late causal stage, is required to continue to plum. So if you're still in early causal, when you get to teal, your teal work will include discovering late causal, base principles of reality. Plum, witnessing stage is required to continue to aubergine. So if you're still in late causal when you get to plum, your plum work will include discovering witnessing stage, fundamental opposites. Aubergine, non-dual stage is required to continue to tier 3. So If you're still in witnessing stage when you get to aubergine, your aubergine work will include discovering non-dual stage. This is yet another reason why I like at least 7 stages of spiritual development. It maps much more nicely and I think accurately onto the tier 2 stages, where spiritual development really comes to the forefront if it hasn't already for the person or people in question. Now, how the 7 state/stage model relates to developmental lines. I sort of imply this in the developmental lines video, but all developmental lines converge to non-dual eventually, because all developmental lines follow the stages of consciousness, and the stages of consciousness, as I just described, converge to non-dual eventually. In terms of following a single developmental line, here's what that looks like. Growth stage, physically doing, as in physically doing the skill, like putting a band-aid on a cut, or physically doing stuff in that area of life, or physically taking the actions pertaining to that intelligence. For example, on the emotional intelligence line, you can give somebody a hug without analyzing it. Early subtle, mental/emotional grokking of the skill, area of life, or intelligence, like fully understanding all the native herbs in your region, their properties, and how to use them to heal ailments. The late part of this stage is where you start seeing and understanding connections between disparate developmental lines. Late subtle, outer court magic. This is where the skill, area of life, or intelligence starts to really get magical/mystical, like diagnosing someone's ailments by seeing or feeling them with your inner senses. Early causal, inner court magic, like healing a blocked fate path or using time travel to heal past wounds. Late causal, experiencing and grokking the base principles and processes that everything shares. This is where the distinctions between different developmental lines really start to dissolve. Witnessing, discovering the fundamental opposites of reality. For example, at this point, it might look like there are really only 2 developmental lines. And/or you might notice that all development is simply the interplay of fundamental dualities. And/or you might experientially realize that there is only development and stillness. Non-dual, no distinction between developmental lines at all, nor even between the knower and the known.